In the outer orbit of the Terran frontier, inside a quiet station that floated like forgotten metal in the vast black sea of space, lived a man named Mark. His days were spent fixing broken cargo loaders, rewiring fried circuits, and drinking lukewarm coffee while watching distant stars blink like old memories. Mark wasn't a hero or a scientist or someone the galaxy would remember. But sometimes the galaxy doesn't care about importance when it knocks on your door. The station wasn't grand, just another outpost holding Earth's shaky grip in a universe that didn't care much for humans. There were hundreds of stations like it scattered across colonized sectors. They were lonely places where whispers traveled faster than light and rumors shaped more policy than facts. It was one such whisper that started the strange turn in Mark's life. It began in the cargo bay where two dockhands spoke in hushed voices about a new diplomatic program, an interspecies union project. They said Earth was trying to strengthen peace by marrying humans into alien dynasties. Mark laughed the first time he heard it. The idea sounded ridiculous, but 3 days later, a message pinged his terminal. Official seal. No sender name. Number. Explanation. Just a blinking message asking if he would agree to join the Unity protocol. If accepted, he would be given land rights on any Earth-aligned colony, lifetime security clearance, financial immunity from debt, and a bride from one of the high species chosen for him through sealed genetics. It didn't even ask his preferences. It simply waited for his answer. Mark didn't know why they picked him. Maybe his background fit a profile, or maybe they needed someone unimportant enough to vanish quietly if things went wrong. He didn't ask questions. Maybe part of him was just too tired of the same walls, the same meals, the same stars outside his window. Maybe part of him wanted to matter, even a little. So he said yes. They told him nothing more. Just that his bride would arrive on the next lunar cycle. That he must prepare for a ceremonial bond and keep all contact confidential. She would be Valari. The message said a name Mark had never heard before. When he searched the archives, all he found were fragments. The Valari were not part of the regular trade or travel circuits. No photos, no confirmed appearances. Only reports that they rarely left their own zone and almost never revealed their form to outsiders. When the day came, he was told to dress in neutral white and wait at Dock Chamber 9. The chamber was cold and dim with only a circle of soft light marking the meeting ground. He waited alone, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. Then the chamber doors slid open without sound, and she entered. She wore robes unlike anything Mark had seen. Not stitched or printed, but flowing with motion like liquid metal rippling in soft waves. Her face was hidden by a veil, not cloth, but energy, a gentle shimmer that flickered every time she moved. Her steps made no sound. Her presence shifted the air like gravity, pulling thought and silence into her orbit. She stood before him and raised her hand, not to touch but to signal agreement. That was the ceremony. No vows, no music, just agreement. One human, one Valari. Witnessed by the machine that recorded the contract. Mark nodded, trying not to stare too hard, trying to understand what exactly he had just done. Later, she followed him to his quarters quietly without hesitation. She did not speak. When Mark tried to ask her name, she only tilted her head as if listening to something far away. He offered her food. She did not eat. She moved around the room, touching nothing yet seeming to understand everything. Mark sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor. He felt foolish, tricked, married to a ghost with no voice, no eyes, no face. But even in that frustration, something about her stirred his curiosity. He watched the way her form moved through shadows like she belonged to space more than to walls. The way her presence filled the room with a calm that didn't feel natural. That night he lay awake as soft pulses of light flickered across his ceiling, reflections from her robe. He turned to her once and found her standing at the window, not looking out, but simply being there. As if the stars outside were part of her skin, and silence her language. He spoke anyway. Told her about his mother on Earth, who made clocks from old ship parts. Told her about how he came to the frontier to escape people, and somehow found himself surrounded by more loneliness. He didn't expect a response. But somewhere in the quiet, her hand lifted, slowly hovered in the air, and released a faint hum. Not a word, not a sentence, but a note. Gentle and strange and vibrating through the walls like a whisper from the stars themselves. Mark sat up, heart racing. That single sound felt like something ancient, like a key turning in a locked door inside his thoughts. She turned her head, and though he could not see her eyes, he felt her gaze, heavy, knowing, watching not just him but everything behind him. Everything he had forgotten. He said nothing more that night. He slept while she stood still like a statue of light at the edge of his dreams. By morning, she was still there, unchanged, silent, a being from another reality now tethered to his body. Agreement and protocol and something deeper he had no words for yet. What he didn't know was that this marriage was not a beginning but a test, and before the end he would discover truths that would burn through everything he knew about humans, about aliens, and about the stars themselves, and none of it would matter. Unless he chose the right path when the time came, because some unions are not made by policy or power, some are made by fate reaching across galaxies. The next day came slowly, as if time itself hesitated to move forward, unsure of what had been set in motion. Mark woke before the station lights rose, the artificial morning pressing weak yellow light through the thin walls of his quarters. He turned and found her sitting beside the window again, her figure still as if carved from starlight and dreams. The robe she wore shimmered softly in the dim glow, sending faint ripples across the floor, like water meeting wind. She had not moved all night, or maybe she had moved in ways Mark's eyes could not follow. Mark sat up, rubbing sleep from his face, wondering if she had watched him while he slept, wondering if she even slept at all. He cleared his throat and tried again to speak. He asked if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she understood him at all. Her head turned slightly in his direction, and for a moment he thought he saw her hand twitch like she was reaching for something, just outside the reach of language. But no words came, no gestures, no clear reply, only that same presence filling the air around her like she was made of more than just shape and form. Station had assigned them a private chamber, far from the crew levels, near the quietest side of the habitat ring. It was larger than what Mark was used to, and oddly clean, like someone had gone through it with too much care before their arrival. The walls had no personal markings, no old posters or scratched panels. Even the air smelled new, processed too perfectly. It made the space feel temporary, as if the station did not expect them to stay long. They walked together that day, in silence, through the lower maintenance corridors, where Mark usually worked. He tried to show her the engine rooms, the reactor intake valves, the old mess hall that no one used anymore. She followed without hesitation, always walking just behind him, her steps soundless but strangely timed, like she was listening to the rhythm of his movement. Other crew members avoided them, not out of fear but confusion. No one knew what to say. No one had ever seen a Valari before, not even the captain, who pretended not to care, but kept checking system logs every hour. Something changed later that evening when Mark returned from the generator chamber. The door to their quarters opened. Before he touched it, she was inside, standing in the center of the room, both hands raised in the air like she was reaching toward the ceiling. The lights above flickered gently, not violently, but with a slow pulse, like a breath held too long. Mark stepped inside and felt the temperature shift around him, not colder, not warmer, but heavier, like space itself had bent inward. He called her name softly, the only one he knew to use, the one printed on the official contract, Lyra. The sound seemed to echo strangely across the room, not bouncing off the walls, but sinking into them. She turned then and lowered her hands, and for the first time Mark saw something change in her veil. The shimmer broke apart, slowly revealing not her full face, but a glimpse, just a line of light that curved like a cheekbone, and an outline that bent like a smile not of joy, but recognition. It vanished quickly, but it stayed in Mark's mind, burned there like the afterimage of a distant sun. That night the ceremonial bonding ritual was meant to take place. Mark had no idea what to expect. He wore the robe left for him by the station officer's, white with silver lining and no fasteners. Lyra emerged from the far end of the room dressed in a second layer over her original robe, this one darker with thin lines of gold that seemed to move on their own. No one else attended. The ritual was private, sacred, not meant for human eyes beyond the couple themselves. The machine recorded their presence in the chamber and then shut down silently, the lights dimming to a soft amber glow. Mark stood there, heart thudding, as Lyra walked toward him, each step slower than the last, until she stopped only inches away. He could hear a faint hum rising not from her mouth, but from the air around her, a sound that moved into his bones and slowed his breath. Then her veil began to lift, not by hand but by some invisible force, rising upward layer by layer like mist being pulled away by unseen wind. Mark braced himself, unsure what he would see, unsure what he wanted to see. But what was revealed was not horror or beauty as he understood it. What stood before him was something else entirely. Her face was not a face in the human sense, but a flowing field of light shaped by emotion and memory and form. Her eyes were not eyes, but bright points of energy swirling inward like tiny stars spinning in silent orbit. Her skin was translucent, shifting with every flicker of her thoughts. Mark felt dizzy, not out of fear, but out of awe, like standing too close to something meant to be worshipped, not touched. She spoke at last, but not with sound. Her voice arrived in his mind as a tide of feelings and images. She spoke of distance, of longing, of stars too old to remember names. She told him her name, not in letters, but in light, a pattern that danced across the room and etched itself into his memory. She told him she had chosen him not because he was powerful or brilliant, but because he was silent enough to hear her truth through all the noise of the world. Mark did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, letting the waves of her voice pass through him until the last light faded and her veil returned, covering her face once more. The bond was complete, though he did not know what it meant, yet not fully. But something inside him had shifted like a thread pulled loose in the center of his mind. Later that night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, he felt her presence beside him, not touching but near, close enough for warmth without heat, close enough for his thoughts to quiet. He closed his eyes and saw her face again, not strange, not terrifying, just vast, too vast to fit in words. And somewhere deep inside, Mark knew that whatever had just begun was no simple marriage, no ordinary agreement. It was the first step toward something greater, something hidden beyond the edge of stars, something waiting in silence for someone to finally see it, and he had seen it. Days that followed moved with a rhythm Mark had never known before, a strange balance between silence and awakening, where each moment beside Lyra felt stretched beyond its ordinary shape, as if time slowed to make space for something older than clocks or calendars. She no longer kept to the edges of the room, no longer stood apart from him in complete stillness. Though her voice did not return in words, her presence had grown stronger, more expressive, not through speech but through motion, through patterns of light that played gently across the walls and floors. Wherever she passed, Mark started to understand small things, how her movement changed with mood, how the tone of light she carried could shift like the sky before a storm, how the air became cooler when she felt distant and warmer when she drew near in comfort or calm. She watched him work sometimes, her head tilted with curiosity as he repaired the oxygen filters or checked the hydraulic systems of the cargo lifts. Her questions came not in phrases, but in sudden shared images, impressions passed directly into his mind, like sparks of memory pressed between them. One day, while repairing a damaged power line, Mark touched a broken coil and felt a surge of energy, not from the wire, but from her presence behind him. She had not moved visibly, yet he felt her reach into the system itself, guiding the current around his body, bending it away from harm. It wasn't a trick or a machine response, it was her power working with the station's own materials, as if the walls and circuits answered her like servants remembering a long-lost queen. He turned to her, then staring with questions filling his eyes, and though she did not speak aloud, something in the moment shifted between them. She stepped closer, and for the first time placed her hand on his chest, not heavy, not forceful, but with a softness that made the air around them still. In that instant, Mark saw something not with his eyes but with a vision that unfolded inside. His thoughts like a dream forced open. He saw stars dying, he saw ships burning in the quiet space beyond time, he saw beings of light drifting through black voids, singing songs that echoed in no language. He saw the Velari not as creatures, but as guardians woven from energy and intention, beings who once held the responsibility of maintaining balance across systems older than any recorded history. He saw how they did not rule, but served, how their light moved between worlds, healing cracks in space itself, binding stars before collapse and guiding new life toward harmony. But then something happened, something terrible. A war not with weapons, but with fear and silence. The Velari were hunted not because they attacked, but because others believed their power too strange, too deep, too uncontrollable. Whole empires turned against them, afraid of what they could not understand, so they retreated, drifting inward, collapsing into hidden clusters deep within forgotten sectors where no trade routes passed. They lived in secrecy, guarding the last fragments of their knowledge, unable to reproduce, unable to stabilize their energy forms alone. Most faded, others went into permanent sleep, and some like Lyra were sent out in desperate hope, not to conquer, but to find a bond with something that could restore them, something grounded enough to hold their form, something human. Mark stepped back from the vision, breath short, heart pounding with a weight he could not describe. Lyra lowered her hand and turned away, her glow dimming slightly, as if showing him this had cost her something more than energy. She moved to the edge of the room and sat without motion, and for a long time, neither of them spoke, not through thought, not through light. Later that night, Mark sat alone on the observation deck, staring at the endless stars outside. The quiet buzz of the station systems was the only sound. He tried to piece together the truth she had shown him, tried to understand what it meant to be chosen, what it meant to carry something beyond his life, beyond Earth, beyond all he had known. He didn't feel special, but somehow she had chosen him. Not for strength, not for brilliance, but for stillness, for his ability to listen without fear. But things around them had begun to shift. The station's commander had noticed changes, strange energy readings, fluctuations in core systems unexplained. Light pulses during deep night cycles. Rumors spread quietly through crew channels about the alien bride, about her presence and her silence. One technician claimed to see her vanish into a wall, another said her shadow bent in the wrong direction when she walked. Fear always came where knowledge was missing, and the unknown always invited suspicion. Mark received a quiet visit from a man in a gray uniform, no rank badge, no name. The man asked simple questions at first about the wedding, about Lyra's behavior, but then his tone grew colder. He asked if she had touched any of the main systems, if Mark had noticed changes in electrical flow or gravitational fields. Mark Lead said he had noticed nothing, said she was quiet, peaceful, uninterested in machinery. The man nodded once and left without comment, but Mark knew this was not the end of the questions. That evening he found Lyra standing at the edge of the sleeping deck, her body almost invisible, her glow like a dying ember. He reached out slowly, and she turned toward him with a flicker of hesitation. He told her about the visit, told her they might come for her, that the station might not allow her to stay. She did not respond with images this time, only stood still. Her hands at her side, her veil trembling faintly with an energy that felt like sadness. She walked toward him then, and reached out again, not to share vision but to touch his forehead. A pulse passed through him, and he felt it not as light or sound but as a memory. Not his own, a moment from her life, a world made of crystal sky and flowing fields and song where beings like her danced across air with joy. He saw it collapse, saw fire rip through the sky, saw her people turn to ash and shadow. He felt her grief not as a story, but as a part of himself now carried within him like a secret flame. He held her hand, and for the first time she leaned into him, her energy not overwhelming, but soft like dusk slowly falling over distant mountains. And in that quiet moment he understood what she needed, not escape, not protection, but someone who would choose her, not out of duty, not for reward, but because they saw her not as a mystery, but as someone worth saving. Mark made a choice that night. Not with words, not with promises, but with presence. He would stay by her side no matter what came, because something deeper than fear had taken root, and it was not just the bond of marriage, it was the first sign of something the stars had waited centuries to see again. The silence of space carried weight, and now it pressed harder against the station walls, as if something unseen had shifted just beyond reach. Inside the control center, soft alarms pulsed with low red glows, warning not of danger, but of change. Officers moved with nervous steps, eyes flicking toward screens that showed nothing unusual yet. Every technician felt it like a pressure in the air, a quiet signal that whispered something was no longer stable. Mark noticed the difference the moment he stepped into the corridor outside the living quarters. 2 guards stood there pretending not to notice him, their expressions fixed, their bodies too still. He didn't ask questions, didn't speak, only walked past them and into the chamber where Lyra waited near the central console, her glow reduced to a single dim pulse, barely strong enough to light the space around her. She looked at him, and he felt it again, the connection now quiet, but warm like fire burning low under ash. She had stopped communicating since the last vision, only offering glimpses, soft colors at the edge of his mind, soft touches that lasted only seconds. Mark understood it wasn't because she didn't trust him, but because sharing took effort, it drained her, and now she seemed weaker than before, as if the environment around her had begun to push her away. They didn't know how much time they had. He sensed it in the way the ship's systems responded differently, the lights dimming when she walked past, the machines slowing as she entered a room. The station was rejecting her not by choice, but by design. Its systems made to support humans, and human logic could not hold what she was for very long. Something needed to change, or she would vanish, not with noise or pain, but with silence, leaving nothing behind but a memory of light. Later that day he was summoned to the central chamber, not asked but ordered. He walked through long corridors, watched by eyes behind glass, eyes behind armor, eyes behind fear. Inside the chamber he found the same gray uniformed man, sitting at the end of a long table, covered in datasheets and energy readouts and blinking graphs. The man spoke without emotion, said there had been anomalies, said they traced them to her, said the Valari presence was destabilizing systems designed to support only matter-based life. He never used her name, never spoke of her as a person, only as a variable, a risk, a source of interference. Mark tried to argue, tried to say she wasn't dangerous, tried to explain she wasn't attacking the station, that she didn't mean harm. The man listened, then tapped a button and displayed a set of energy signatures overlapping through the core systems, showing how her presence altered basic code, made walls ripple with electromagnetic waveforms, made metal forget its density for a moment. It wasn't just strange, it was uncontainably. Said she would be moved, taken to a containment chamber in orbit, where specialists would study her energy form, monitor her disintegration rate, attempt communication under controlled conditions. Mark knew what that meant. They would strip her light until it broke. They would call it research, but it would be quiet execution. He refused, quietly, then loudly, then with anger, but it changed nothing. They told him she would be collected in 1 hour, that he should remain in his quarters. He didn't go back to his quarters, he went to her. The chamber door was already opening when he arrived, 2 men in containment suits, stepping inside, their gloves glowing faintly with neutralizing current. Mark pushed past them and stood between them and Lyra, not speaking, not threatening, just standing. One of the men raised a hand to push him aside, but Mark didn't move and the man hesitated just long enough. Lyra looked up at him and something shifted. Her glow pulsed once, then spread out through the room like a wave, soft and gold, not hot, not blinding, just warm, like memory flowing into light. The two men froze, their suits humming in confusion, their equipment flickering, as if unsure how to process what they were seeing. Mark stepped back slowly, reached for Lyra's hand, and touched it firmly this time, not out of fear, but choice. Chamber lights burst, then dimmed, the doors slid shut behind them, and the alarm rang through the station, not loud, not sharp, just a dull rising sound that told everyone something had gone wrong. They ran through the secondary passageways, old maintenance shafts Mark had repaired himself years before, never thinking they would save his life. Lyra moved beside him, not running, but gliding, her form shifting just enough to keep pace, her glow bending around corners. Before he reached them, they reached the outer ring where emergency pods were stored, and Mark started unlocking the panel. Typing fast through overrides using codes he was never supposed to know. Lyra turned to him then, and her light shifted to deep blue and pale silver, the language of goodbye, but he shook his head. Not now, not yet. The door opened, and they stepped inside, and the pod launched quietly into space. No chase, no blast, just a silent push into the black inside the pod. Lyra sat across from him, her hands folded, her glow flickering softly in rhythm with the pod's heartbeat. Mark leaned back, closed his eyes, breathed in the recycled air, and waited for the calm that never came. He opened his eyes again. She was looking at him, and slowly her hand lifted and reached toward his temple. This time he did not resist this time. He welcomed the vision that came. He saw a place not on any map, a structure floating in darkness, surrounded by ancient engines that still hummed with forgotten purpose. A Valari sanctuary, untouched by time, sealed against interference, locked until someone with both matter and light could open it. She had been searching for it, and now with him she believed they could find it, not to escape, not to hide, but to restore balance, not only to her people, but to the very systems of space that once breathed through her kind. Mark nodded, once knowing the message they needed to send was not to warn Earth or threaten it, but to remind it of something long buried, something Earth had once known when its skies were full of wonder. He took her hand, and they turned toward the stars. In that moment, everything that had once felt strange now felt like destiny unfolding. Stars outside the pod moved like whispers drifting in silence beyond any sound or logic, and Mark stared into them as if they might answer the questions rising inside him. He didn't speak, not yet. His thoughts moved slowly, one behind the other, following the steady rhythm of the escape pod as it floated far from the station. Lyra sat beside him, her glow soft like a candle caught between wind and breath, not dim but quiet, holding strength inside calm. She had said little since their flight, but her presence filled the space between them, without weight, without demand, only meaning. Coordinates she had sent him through shared thought, burned gently in his mind. Not like data, not like code. Like memory slowly unlocking itself through warmth and feeling. He entered the navigation, manually bypassing the system's built-in routes, guiding the pod. Not toward a planet, not toward a city, but toward something hidden behind gas clouds and drifting debris, forgotten by maps and untouched by traffic for longer than any living human could remember. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost its shape between stars. Mark slept in brief pieces, always waking to find her near, not watching him, just being near with a presence that calmed his breath and slowed his racing thoughts. Sometimes when he opened his eyes, he saw her glow changing, shifting from soft blues to golden light, as if dreaming through colors, as if remembering things that had no words. When they reached the edge of the cloud field, the pod slowed automatically. The navigation panel flashing warning signals about unknown gravitational patterns and structural anomalies. Mark ignored them. He took the manual controls and guided them deeper into the cloud, their ship rattling gently with turbulence, not from air or gravity, but from something older, from energy that had once shaped galaxies, now stirring faintly around them. And then they saw a great structure hidden in the mist, not built like human stations, not shaped by bolts or metal, but curved and flowing like a sculpture grown from light and stone. It did not spin or move, but it hummed softly like the sound of ancient breath waiting for a voice to answer. The pod slowed and docked without instruction, without clearance, as if the place had been waiting for them, as if it had already known they were coming. Inside, the structure was dark, at first silent, and still like the last room in a sleeping world. But as Mark stepped out with Lyra beside him, the walls began to glow with faint symbols that pulsed like heartbeat marks stretching across the surface like veins of light. The space welcomed them, not with doors, not with signals, but with warmth that flowed through the floor and into their feet, through the walls and into their hands. Every step forward felt like a return, like walking through something that had once known their names. Lyra moved ahead and the room responded to her presence, the lights growing brighter, the patterns forming shapes around her like memory rising from silence. She turned to Mark and placed her hand in his once more, and in that moment, something new began. Her light shifted and moved into him, not violently, not painfully, but as if wrapping around his core, as if folding into the shape of his thoughts without asking, without forcing, only offering. He closed his eyes and let it happen, let the energy flow through him, let it wake parts of him he had never touched. The walls responded immediately, glowing with intensity signals, flaring through the sanctuary like stars blinking awake after a long dream. Machines that had been still for centuries now stirred, systems flickered on lights, flowed through circuits, and a central voice, one not heard in any human tongue, began to speak, softly through vibration, through thought. Mark heard not just language but understanding. The sanctuary had recognized the bond not just between them, but within them. Human matter joined with Velari light, not in body alone, but in purpose. He was not Velari, and never would be, but he had become something more than just human, not through power, not through force, but through choice, through presence, through empathy. The sanctuary opened fully then, walls sliding apart, not with sound, but with flow, revealing a vast chamber filled with ancient light crystalline towers reaching toward the ceiling, glowing softly with stored memory and dormant knowledge. Lyra moved toward one and placed her hand against it, and it lit up with a sudden flare of warmth and understanding. Mark followed her, his heart steady, not with fear, not with confusion, but with quiet certainty. The system scanned them both then, recorded them not as intruders, not as threats, but as the first of a new kind, the first bridge between fading light and rising life. A beacon launched from the top of the sanctuary, cutting through the clouds beyond the stars, carrying not warning, not war, but invitation. Mark stood beside her and looked at the data flowing through the crystal towers, messages meant for Earth, meant for anyone willing to listen, messages written in light and time and trust. He saw his name there, saw her name not in letters but in glow, saw their union recorded not as contract but as harmony. And then came the final message, a voice rising from the sanctuary, reaching outward to all who would hear. We are not what you feared. We are what you forgot to become. Not gods, not masters, not shadows, just keepers of light, waiting for someone to return to the path. Mark turned to Lyra, and she looked at him, not with eyes, not with face, but with presence, and he understood that this was no longer about survival. This was about awakening, about remembering what it meant to be more than a species, more than a number, more than a gear in a machine. The Conqueror Station had called her dangerous, the government had called her unstable, the world had called her mystery, but now Mark knew the truth. She was not a danger, she was a doorway, and he had stepped through now. They would wait not as rulers, not as leaders, but as voices in the dark, holding light steady until others came, not to conquer, not to flee, but to listen. And in that silent, shining chamber, hidden beyond the edge of memory, a human and a Velari stood hand in hand, not as strangers, not as symbols, but as the first notes in a forgotten song waiting to be heard again. The end.